Good evening, dear friends. Dear friends of ESSERE, welcome back. And welcome to the press office of the Higher Plains. It's a column that, as you know, I occasionally do. To continue conveying information, so as I jokingly say, to act as the press office of the Higher Plains, thus all the teachings that Ariel has been continuously transmitting to me for 24 years now. And so, I do it either to continue spreading the teachings information or to convey to you the information, including those that are more recent and more related to current events. You know that, when, it happens that Ariel asks to speak to me, well, for the past 3 years, Francesco is no longer here, but he was indeed my first modem for many years. But now, for the past 3 years, as you know, Ariel made this choice and brought me Riccardo because Francesco, over the years, with his free will, had chosen to distance himself from these spiritual paths. And so, as our friends from the higher planes do, they went to find themselves a new channel, and thus brought me Riccardo as, we jokingly say, as a modem. He, who had this passion from a young age, told me that the first thing he bought with his own money was a modem. And eventually, in his life, he actually became a modem. He had this attraction to modems. Isn't that a lovely story? So, this was already a very clear indication of what his role, his task, should be, beyond what might be considered a daily routine, which is quite separate from an activity of this kind. So, what happens? Ariel calls me, saying he wants to talk to me, so Riccardo comes to my house in Turin. And that's how we begin. The channeling. I listen to what Ariel has to say to me, and then, of course, I continue to conduct my inquiries and ask questions about existential matters or indeed about current events. So, in April, Ariel asked to speak to me, and this press office is recorded. You will hear it in May, and naturally, we talked about issues concerning current events. So, there is quite a lively scenario as we are experiencing in these days while I am recording. Well, 2 days ago, the news of the Pope's death arrived. And so, we have scenarios, as it were, of truly significant changes happening simultaneously, things and events that will certainly lead to transformations. Indeed, we know that from a political point of view, a series of transformations are underway, and new dynamics have come into play, such as relationships, breaking of balances, cancelled agreements, and new realities that will be built step by step. On the other hand, reality must be faced for what it is, and we need to find a way to manage it. We cannot remain stuck on what should be or what we would like it to be. We need to understand the scenario in front of us and act accordingly, staying very close to the facts and creating a condition, albeit not an easy one, for dialogue. And as we hear so much about these days, negotiations, because there are always only two paths. Either you negotiate and reach agreements, or you go to war. You go to war, use force, and also use oppression. So, now we have a reality where there is still a lot of work to be done, and the wars are not over. In fact, as Ariel says, there might be more to come. We know that the arrival of this new American political reality has led to significant changes. Moreover, there is a, how shall I say, a rather aggressive scenario, indeed. So, Ari, when I asked how this reality is going to be managed, know that on the 30th of November, I remember he told me, we are waiting for the new year because we are waiting for a man. So, obviously, they were waiting for the American elections. Then, when Trump was inaugurated on the 20th of January, on the 31st of January, we worked because Ari wanted to speak to me and also wanted to speak to you. Do you remember that we did the press office of the higher plans with the live broadcast, so also with Ricardo and with Conari, who wanted to speak directly to you? And I remember that indeed, when Doria and I worked alone, I asked him about this inauguration, and he told me something that really struck me because he said, you know, this man had an opportunity to make a choice, but he chose the others. What does it mean? He chose the others. I said, but what does it mean to the others? That he chose more the shadows, those of the shadows rather than those of the light. And he indeed confirmed this to me and also made a gesture to show that the choice was for strength, power, and interests, essentially the scenario that is before our eyes. So, as far as current events are concerned, things are very much in transformation. There will be, probably he says not now, not immediately. In short, things will not go exactly as he wanted. There will be a slowdown. Not now, not immediately, you see. But, in short, it will take a little time, you see, before certain things come to fruition, which, I repeat, all those predictions have not, in fact, materialized, as we have seen in such a short time as was in Trump's intentions. And so, he says that there will be setbacks further down the line. Ooh. And so, do you know what the interesting thing is? It's that I always ask this question, to Ari, because I think about the souls. I say to myself, well, when this soul, the souls of certain very strong characters in history, when you go over there, in the end, you carry within you what you have chosen to do, right? And so, that's where the real test of truth lies, where you can truly see what you have done with your choices and also see, perhaps, how much harm you have caused, as well as how much good you have done. For example, Ari said that, for instance, Trump has also done a lot of good. He has also helped many people, but it has always been his choice, you see. But, I repeat, there is a transition, there is a transformation that, well, involves moments of, well, a bit of suffering, you see. And so, well, this humanity, let's say, hasn't learned much from history. Certain things, certain cycles, well, they repeat themselves. Now we have different realities compared to those of the past. For example, in the past, information didn't exist as it does now, with all the limitations, with all the manipulations that may occur, but still, the reality from an informational point of view was much more limited. Now, let's say that this factor, allows for reactions to be created and paths to be altered. So, let's say that, in the future, there might be a desire to revisit scenarios of war, of major conflicts. Ari, he said that In short, wars are not over yet, and more are still to come. He reconfirmed, you see, what I've already told you, that for us in Italy it will be much better than. In other reactions, we have, in other nations. We also talked about the Middle East. He had told me the previous time that, because I asked, but what about these innocent souls? Let's think of all the dead in Gaza. These children. Well, we have them in Ukraine. We also have them in other wars that we never mention but that exist in the world. There are more than 50, therefore. Yes. And indeed, I had specifically asked about Gaza in previous times. I had asked, but these souls that have incarnated and died like this, from children to adults, did they choose to incarnate, to live, and die like this? And he told me that no, 97% had not chosen it, but were undergoing, as I have already told you more than once, that we must understand when there are things happening in our lives that are not the result of our free will. They are not choices we have made. They are not, as we say, those things written in our destiny, but rather they are events that stem from the free will of others, so the choices of others, and thus we find ourselves, so to speak, victims of these choices. So he had said, 97%, only 3% had chosen to incarnate to do this, always for that law of compensation, which is very difficult for us to accept, which is, so to speak, that law of the soul, where one compensates with experiences in this life for experiences made in another life, and to truly acquire awareness and total consciousness, because it's one thing to act and another to endure. Having awareness of both sides of the coin, then we can truly learn and evolve, and thus avoid taking certain paths in our life. So, regarding that reality as well, in fact, when we talked about the Middle East, he told me, it's truly a hell there. And all these deaths that we see are something, he said, that breaks our hearts, and in that land, it will take time, it will take a lot more time, to find peace. So, I repeat, the information regarding current events is information that, so to speak, gives us an opportunity. If nothing else, I always tell you to have awareness and understanding of what is happening around us. Afterwards, we are here to live this time, so we must live it, but it is important to know how to live it in the most appropriate and aware way possible, always remembering the most important thing, which Ari reminds us of every time, saying you must be concerned that the most important thing in your lives is what you will take away. So what is an evolutionary journey of your soul? Because this is what will be your true heritage. Because life in this dimension is nothing more than a time of experience. Because life, as Ariel says, true life is not where you are, but true life is here, where we are. And so, you see that it always comes back, as I often say, doesn't it? In the end, what is the true control room? The true control room is the soul. So, understanding what we are, therefore, we are primarily a soul. That comes here to this gym to do a bit of exercise to learn, to train ourselves in the best way, which means truly training for life and light, to gain awareness, even by going through trials that put us in a position to experience what is not light but shadows. However, the shadows are functional for the light. They are needed, so they are part of the plan. And thanks to the time of experience we have in this earthly dimension, we can have experiences that allow us to reach awareness that gives us the opportunity to live this time with greater balance, with fewer fears, with less anxiety, because we can, through certain awareness, keep our mind in check, our mind that naturally is there, generating and projecting images that are images of fear and terror when we live in ignorance. But if we have the opportunity to have knowledge, as I always tell you, for me, as a journalist being here and doing my volunteer service, as a press office for the higher planes, to bring you information that, as I have said many times, are not MMMH, information that are the result of theories generated by the human mind, therefore from a limited mind, from limited knowledge, but rather are words and knowledge that come from other planes of existence, more evolved than us, who care for us, who want to help us, who want to support us in this trial. As Ariel says, of course, it is hard to live as humans. And I say, well, yes, of course, don't tell me. We joke about it, but this dimension is precisely that gym. That gives us the opportunity to grow if we can interpret the meaning of life. Otherwise, we are only living under the banner of precariousness, under the banner of depression, of fear, in subjugation to all those anxieties, right? Generated from daily life. Therefore, I repeat, having in this case, this historical time, it is a complicated time that we are living in, we cannot do. Without it, I mean MMH, what can we do? In a time we are here on this planet. EE. And so each of us, already we, for example, here in Italy, are very fortunate compared to other nations, so also this knowing how to position ourselves on the world stage and recognize what our advantage is, that is, living in a reality that gives us advantages compared to other peoples, compared to other nations. So, even this examination of reality is very important, indeed, to do. However, I repeat, we know that this is the scenario. As you can see, certain things that have been around for a few years, there are people who, indeed, engage in a sort of mental terrorism about these are not yet the times of great upheavals of the planet, of things, but they are times of change and of balances that will change, and obviously, like everything that dies, moves, it moves, creating transformations in everything, and so one condition dies and another is created. Moreover, I want to remind you that the law of impermanence is fundamental, something for all of us to remember, because truly there is no permanence in anything. Everything is in continuous transformation, so everything is impermanence. And I must tell you that we have had the opportunity to live. Speaking as the West, we have been able to live these 80 years in a condition that, I was born in 51, and I thought I would never see wars again, because, in my opinion, after the Second World War, there would be no more wars with the lesson we had right from. But no, that's not the case. In this, indeed, it is confirmation that nothing is so stable, and nothing is so definitive, and peace is an achievement of every day, one moment after another. And it's not even that easy to achieve, but we also need an education. In peace, an education. In life, an education. In kindness. In gratitude, an education. In love. In respect, we need an education. We need to re-educate ourselves as humans. We really need, as I've said many times before, to put humans back at the center. To put humans back at the center and truly create a new renaissance, a new humanism where we preserve the prerogatives of being human, where we should always be the partisans of our humanity. This is also a phrase you've heard me say many times before, but it's true. Now, this is indeed a very important time. With Ariel, we also talked about artificial intelligence. We talked about artificial intelligence, and, well, I took notes because I didn't want to forget the things Ariel told me, and he, indeed told me that, artificial intelligence, I mean, we should be the ones using artificial intelligence, we should be the ones using technology. So, and, now, what do we have? What do we have? You know it very well, don't you? I mean, So technology should really be at our service, at the service of humanity. Instead, the problem is that now it is replacing humans. We no longer pick up a pen to write, and we no longer think about what we want to write. We take, in hand, this electro, which I call this appliance that is the mobile phone, and we ask ChatGPT or artificial intelligence. We ask it to write the text for us. So we no longer think, we no longer use our emotions, our feelings, but what do we rely on? We rely on artificial intelligence where from a cold, icy silicon reality, there you go. And so inanimate, yet it manages to produce phrases full of emotions and full of a feeling, without cloning what we are. So we are practically putting our emotions, our feelings, to sleep, also because the machine takes what man has put into it, right? I mean, here in artificial intelligence there are the things that man has put into it, there you go. And on this aspect, I also discussed with Ariel about artificial intelligence because he told me a phrase that struck me very much. And he said, fortunately, artificial intelligence is imperfect, because if it were perfect, he said, there would be scenarios that would terrify you. Just to think about them. And you wouldn't be able to imagine how far a perfect artificial intelligence could go. So fortunately, it is imperfect, and thus you are saved in this regard, and you can indeed have opportunities. But you know, the problem is being vigilant, being informed, and not staying out of the world, because staying out simply means being putting oneself completely at service, as it means being able to be used and manipulated. Instead, one must know. And the most reassuring thing is precisely this, because I said to David, well, anyway, I think the soul can never be cloned. Our soul can never be replicated. And he said to me, definitely not. And I told him, all right, so that's the winning hand. MMH, why? Because we are truly unique and unrepeatable. And also our soul is in transformation. It is in transformation by virtue of our choices, by virtue of our free will of what we build, through our choices. And so, it is not a fixed model, it is a permanent model because it is in continuous transformation and unique, because indeed, it is connected to us. And every soul has its own continuous evolution. And so, that aspect there is not replicable. So this is, let's say, our salvation. However, we must be aware of the importance of preserving all this, preserving our emotions, so not being lulled by artificial intelligence is fundamental, because now we unfortunately see young people who now travel only in a state of substitution and numbness, so they leave. They are totally in a relationship of subjugation. This is truly the great battle between good and evil. Because, turning off emotions and turning off feelings really means gradually putting the soul to sleep. Again, I'm not talking about replicating, but certainly about numbing. Yes, we can easily live like zombies in a state of drowsiness, just like that. And so, we need to be clear headed and aware of this and vigilant, because no one will do it for us. This is another very important aspect. No one will do it for us. So, with Ariel, we have, I always say we've reasoned together, but in reality, it's mostly me asking the questions and then he gives me answers, and I follow up with another question, being used to working in an interview style, as I've always done throughout my life. And so you try to build a path that can create an opportunity for you to, a path of deeper understanding, in short. However, we've discussed this topic of artificial intelligence a lot precisely because it is now very invasive in our reality. Moreover, it has all the characteristics of when they say evil caresses you because it wants your soul. So, this discourse of allure, of flattery, and that makes you feel like a god because you manage to achieve things, you manage to write things without having written them yourself, because you only give it an input and it produces a text for you, you only give it keywords, and it constructs romances for you. So it's very important to understand that if we want to go down that path, it means we are abdicating. All that is our human potential. I mean, we already use very little. Not to mention from a mental perspective, we know that we use about 10% of what is the potential of the human mind. Just think about what we will end up doing, you see? I mean, with the limits of the knowledge we have, we think we use 10%, but perhaps with our limited understanding of the full potential of the human mind, we might even be guessing a percentage that's too high. We probably use much less. It could even be that we're using zero point 0, you see. And so, I repeat, if we adhere to this aspect which is fundamental, right? That of emotions. If we let our emotions fall asleep, we let our brain fall asleep, you understand that we are the first proponents. Of course, it's not easy because around us there is this whole world of temptations, right? Of the wonderland, where now it is possible to do anything, where, moreover, the ego finds so many satisfactions, because, I repeat, even those people who are more limited, who have very minimal knowledge, right? They still feel like great literati, top writers, just because they say a few words and somehow a text comes out. So we know that what comes out is not the product of the human mind, but rather the result of a reservoir that can be called Chat GPT or another way, in which man has input a series of terms, a series of things, then, through a form, through an algorithmic intersection, a sentence, a text is constructed. So we also need to understand this. However, there is a great illusion where people see the texts that come out, they feel like almighty beings and great literary figures of the first rank, and thus their ego inflates more and more. And so, what are we heading towards? What could we be heading towards? Yet another ever greater delusion of the ego. Ever greater delusion of omnipotence. Omnipotence is the worst thing. Also, we discussed this with Ariel. When Even on a political level, if someone believes they are omnipotent and thinks they can emulate, he said, the worst thing a person can do is to think they can emulate the creator of everything. He says that. In fact, he said that. He said, I look at the paper for a moment, he said. In the notes, that perhaps that is the worst sin. The worst sin, he says, is precisely trying to believe you are God. Believing you are God. Moreover, there is also an aspect that sometimes those on the other side, because naturally, they exist. The deception, the great deception is precisely that they make you believe you are God, that you are untouchable or even protected by God, and saved, whereas instead, it is those on the other side who save you, protect you because you are needed to create a condition of suffering. I do not forget a phrase that Ariel said to me one evening, many years ago, when we first talked about evil. I asked him for a description, and he said to me, this. He told me that, he is desperate. After all, he was one of those closest to the great creator. But he chose to leave this divine project along with others, and now seeks companions in despair, and thus deceives, flatters others, gives them the illusion of being able to obtain things, but in reality, he puts them in a state of subjugation, which then leads to a collapse, a despair, and then brings you to total submission. So this thing, he is desperate, he seeks companions in despair. I remember this phrase that he told me, it really struck me a lot. And I always remember it in workshops. Actually, now we'll talk about the workshops. And I always remember it in the workshops, in the conferences. This fact that one really needs to be very clear about this aspect of good and evil, because you realize that life in this dimension of dualism, where, I repeat, evil is functional, for the evolution of good, there is always this struggle between good and evil. When evil arrives, it comes always with an allure. But remember that the reflection that I always ask everyone to make is, think about all the dependencies. All dependencies start with an illusion that one is well, that one is strong, powerful, but then gradually one loses more and more free will, hence the control over our choices. Free will is nothing more than the exercise of free choice, and thus one loses that ability to exercise choice and enters into a relationship of subjugation. This is extremely important to remember, because all forms of addiction lead to this circle of the damned, where there is the loss of free will, where one can no longer control things about our body, one can no longer escape this grip that now chains you and creates a decision paralysis that makes you unable to escape a need, an obsessive compulsive stimulus, and whatever type of addiction it is, whether it is drugs, alcohol, gambling, or compulsive shopping, we find all of this. So, I find it is a constant. So I find that in this type of observation, we can truly recognize that in those conditions where there is a loss of free will, where you can no longer, even in emotional relationships, think about relationships. Thank you all. Those criminal loves, as they are called. Think about that. I mean, how often does this happen, right? They are more often women, obviously, than men, looking at the case studies. from the press and current events. And so what happens? That women cannot extricate themselves from certain relationships where a scenario has been created in which, little by little, self-esteem has been eroded, isolation has been created, economic independence has been taken away, leading to this loss of recognition of one's own worth, becoming merely beings without the ability to recognize themselves in their own nature and preciousness. Therefore, remembering the value of our life, of our existence is fundamental. The preciousness of our life must always be prioritized because we need to remember that this life is connected to our soul, to the journey of our soul's evolution, to the opportunity for evolution that our soul has through this ribbon of time, through this dimension where, with a body we can experience, with our emotions we can learn, and we can, I repeat, make choices that lead us to gain awareness. Even though this is not the dimension of perfection, and it is for this reason that they love us. As Arya says, but we suffer seeing you. Suffer because we understand that you need to go through trials to learn. I always remember that. To learn to walk, we fell on our bottoms many times, we scraped our knees many times. And so, it is truly such a gradual journey that we undertake, yet recognizing the true preciousness of our life and our soul is fundamental. It is truly a first step of awareness, of consciousness, of knowing who we are, where we come from, where we are going, in short, understanding, broadly, on an intuitive level, because we could never have full awareness. I always tell you this. As well, we cannot have the arrogance to think that we can know everything. That is, if by chance we have this presumption within us, it means we are in the delusion of the ego. If we start to fine-tune the self, and if we recognize our limit, well, then we are already on the right path, because it means we have already recognized our limit. And recognizing the limit is very healthy. So, it is also a good point of education for our ego, which learns to stay in its place and to recognize its limit, to make room for the greatness of our existence and our essence, which is indeed our soul, also recognizing the limit of our knowledge, our part, precisely because we are here, not by chance, to live this experience, to try to truly understand what we are, to try to understand what we are. Sometimes I find myself saying this phrase that we live to try to understand what we are, which is the simplest way there is. Also, another phrase that I use, which I like very much, and I always say, I remember I said it many years ago at the beginning to Ariel when we were talking about the soul and the evolution of the soul, and I said to him, but then, if we are a spark of a whole, of a divine, then we are God contemplating himself. And this is a good starting point. And then, in my opinion, it is a vision that gives us great breadth. We must also really live life. And I repeat, we are already very, very fortunate in how we live, despite all the problems we may have. We in Italy are much, much more fortunate than many other realities. And So let's really try to be aware of the greatness of our earthly experience. If we are here, it is because we were meant to have this experience. So, as I was saying, Ariel and I talked at length about this discussion about artificial intelligence. Then we also talked about the universal laws, which are precisely those that if you give, you will then receive. That is, if you give love, it doesn't matter. You don't have to wait around. In some way, there is a law of compensation. If you don't give, you will return. Otherwise, when you learn to give, then you will receive. It's something that happens very naturally, so to speak. Well, then time over there doesn't exist, whereas we give it significance. But for them, it's exactly like that. It's precisely that saying, with one hand you give, with the other hand you take. So there's always this exchange, but we call it that, indeed. I said to him, but then, excuse me, we call it as simple as one of. It's a balance. So the whole discussion of evolution, karma, of experiencing, in the end, evolution is nothing more than reaching a state of balance. So karma is about reaching a state of balance. This was also an important step to reflect. Indeed, always on this topic of karma, the experiences that we have. Then we also talked about, we have talked, yes, we also talked about the situation regarding vaccines, about this aspect. With Aria, there has always been a very raw analysis. There is been an analysis it has always been a very tight, very concise analysis, where he clearly stated that on earth, those who govern, there are a few men who command over all the others. And so, humanity is in this relationship of subjugation to certain powers. A few men govern over all the others. So, he also made a reference to the topic of communication. He said, unfortunately, your communication does not work very well because many things that are important are not said, many things that are important but that, obviously, cannot be said. And again, it always comes back to the idea of being vigilant, questioning, and informing oneself. You know that I always tell you to look at things from all angles. Don't just listen to mainstream things, also look at other sources of information. It has always been this way. Those in power do not let inconvenient information through. But then there are realities that exist which are good to know about because at least people become aware. And then it's important, I repeat, to stay informed. What? And especially when it comes to our health, our body, really try to use your own mind, not just be like sheep following the flock and feeling safe if they do the things that everyone does, because it's not guaranteed that doing what everyone else does is doing the right thing. It could be that everyone is doing things that are not right, not healthy. Why? Why is it like this? Because in our reality, it is like this. And today, unlike in the past, when there was no globalization, when there was no communication system, like the ones we have, things operated differently, and issues were resolved much more at a local level, with the possibility of taking very massive actions, as can be done now. And so, on this matter too, he renewed this thought of trying to be very careful. He also says, we suffer from seeing certain things that Man does. In fact, he said, I don't understand why man doesn't understand. He told me, why doesn't man understand and keeps doing the same things? Speaking of wars, when he said, wars are not over, others will come. I said, we won't. Repeat the same scenario. We had. Unfortunately, certain patterns repeat until man learns, until man doesn't truly learn to come out of this. I was looking at what it is that. Yes, indeed, he told me exactly this. Man doesn't learn, and so, then what is ultimately important for any scenario that might unfold before our eyes? He said, in the end, the thing that will always matter, more than anything, is and will be your soul. And he always says, in the worst case, what can happen? That your body dies. But what will remain? Your soul. And so what is important? First of all, it is important to care for your soul. Now, it doesn't mean that we will all die when it means to be more balanced in living through certain times. It is important to have an openness of mind that allows you to be less anxious, to be less sad, to be less depressed. Do you see how people are? It's difficult to find people who smile because now is truly a time where everyone is very worried, not knowing what will happen, what won't happen. But in the meantime, we should try to make something beautiful happen in our surroundings, in our daily lives. Can we try to build it in our own small way? Yes, indeed. And then remember, mainly this talk about the soul, Arya says, your task is to help us save souls, to help them evolve. And so with your work, he laughs and smiles at my thing about the press office, doesn't he? And he even says to me, compliments, he says, but you are very good at making words, our information walk. But, I repeat, now more than ever, it's important, in short, to be concerned. As it has been for some time, you know that I have been telling you this for a long time now, for a long time now, since I've been doing my press office. Be concerned about this because it is the most crucial thing for your future. And so, let's indeed analyze reality. Let's indeed analyze the facts. We thank Arya. We thank this great opportunity. I always say it. We are lucky. Sometimes I think about it. I say, look, mine is such an incredible story. You don't know, 24 years. 24 years of recordings where I have all my sources. There is nothing, I tell you, that is the result of my own theory. I always come here just as a good journalist to do my job. Now I've been doing this for 24 years. I bring you extraordinary information where I go to conduct my investigations, to ask questions about certain aspects of life, about how certain things happen, what happens to the soul, what here. And so, piece by piece, over 24 years, I have managed to build this puzzle that gives you the opportunity to have information with a vision in your mind. At least partially, but at least, you have it, as Arya says, you have the right one, not the one that sometimes many construct their own theories, as he says, or think they are talking to us, they are talking to others, to those of the shadows, or they are talking with their mind. And so on. But anyway, I know that as far as my story is concerned, this is it. So it's been 24 years that I've been receiving information from the higher planes. I have all the recordings of all the sessions with all the topics that have been discussed, because obviously I keep the sources of my information. But I always really think about the magnitude of a project like this, where we can have, and I always try to inform you when there are things that I discuss with Adrian, and then afterwards I tell you what Ariel has told me. And so, it's not something that happens every day, that you can have contacts of this level, and then you can transfer information. And in some way, you are providing support. But above all, you try to always keep in focus what is important to do in the context in which one finds oneself. But really, these are not pieces of information that come from those in this dimension. They come from other planes. Sometimes, you've already understood it. Sometimes they tell me things that I can't say. All of them, also because then they might come and get me. And so, there are things that are a bit more dangerous. That can't just be put online like that. In fact, sometimes Ori tells me things, saying, you mustn't say these. These must remain between us. And I am obviously safe. But this is my story. And so, I only do things for the good. I'm interested in doing my little task, helping souls to evolve. I have no other interest, you know that. I don't need anything. I don't even need you to tell me that you believe what I say, those sorts of things. Every now and then there's someone who ventures, who writes a few lines, but this, I take it, delete it, they go. If someone wants to believe it, fine. If you don't believe it, you're not obliged to, but you can't just come in and write a comment with these keyboard warrior attitudes. So, for me, manners come first, and therefore I remove it, but I don't even waste time on this. Then really, one should never get caught up in these things. Never reinforce these things, never expose oneself to the enemy. Sometimes one might even let it go, might even seem like a fool who doesn't. But one must always choose what is best to do, whether it's better to ignore certain levels, certain pettiness, and move on, or to invest energy. I don't even invest energy, full stop. Like when you have people who, it's like, Ori, I remember he told me, there are gossipers. They say untrue things about you, but don't worry because we're here for you. I told Dario, but I don't even worry because I know very well what I do in my life. People can say all the lies, the things they want, because envy, jealousy, and malice. That mother is always very fertile. So, they are part of it. But it's always like this. When certain things come, they always come from fronts where there are frustrations, where there is envy, dissatisfaction, if there is malice, anger, all these things. So, when you go to reinforce these situations, you are only giving more strength to those energies. So, the best thing is to move forward and leave everyone to face their own responsibilities because the soul does not offer discounts. In fact, I always say, when I see things like this, oh my, I would never want to put those things in my soul, because E, then E, then you have to deal with these things. Like Ariel, right? He told me about certain situations that I know he mentioned to me, right? E. He told me about certain souls. When he says, and then, when they get here, well, they have to reckon with things. And there are also those who, won't meet a good end. However, I actually feel pity, a human compassion for the souls that do those things, because I truly understand that. They are realities where there is no possibility of light, you see. I'm sorry. Sometimes there are situations where perhaps you have helped people a lot. And then, all this hasn't resulted in a benefit for that person, right? Because they have chosen to stay more on the side of the shadows, but we cannot have free will over other people, so everyone is a victim. of their own choices, and therefore, in the end, everyone will get what they deserve, as they say. Therefore, in life, it is really always very important to choose. Choose not to do harm. Choose not to do harm. On this, I can put not one but, not two hands, but even my feet, all right, because, in my life, I have never once chosen to intentionally harm someone. And this, believe me, is a great freedom. It is truly a great freedom. To be free from the fear of having harmed someone and having to account for it tomorrow, right? So, please always remember this aspect. And this is something that Ariel always recommends. And among the other things that Ariel recommends, there is also this. He asked me to continue the internship program. Unfortunately, we had to stop because we had a season where things were being organized. But then there were train strikes that halted us, and there were a series of difficulties. So we had to, as they say, put things on hold. However, Ariel asked me to organize a second level in Turin before the summer. He has already scheduled the third level by the end of the year, and we are preparing a first level for the south. After the summer, in the autumn, we are trying to see if we can do another first level, but we will definitely do one more. It is not easy for us to travel around Italy. I mean, we would like to come to everyone's doorstep, but this has become increasingly problematic because it means moving with the whole team, organizing, dealing with expenses, booking meeting rooms and such, and then train strikes happen, and everything falls apart, and you can't do anything. As has already happened to us, there are some realities that are making things. Ariel told me this, he gave me some directions, and so, he asked me to do the second level in Turin, and we have already announced it. It has already been published. You will see it. You must have already seen it. We will give the opportunity to those who have done the second level, and therefore also the first, because the second level is done after the first, to attend it again for free to review the lesson, also because we provide a service, and we are not doing business with this, so those who have already attended once can come and attend for free. If they want to make a donation, that's fine. If they can't, that's fine too, but we give people the opportunity to grow as much as possible and to repeat a course so that they can strengthen themselves more and more. So, there will be this second level in Turin on the 14th and 15th of June. So, don't miss the opportunity, also because there will be a very, very important third level. I won't say anything, but there will be an international speaker who you will surely like a lot, and we will also do some things. I repeat, Ariel has already set the program. You know that the program is made by them, right? When I say, this is a project that Ariel asked me to do on the 29th of September, 2022, I remind you that he told me I was very good at spreading their knowledge, teaching everything, that I was the best in my land, but that my soul still had two projects to complete. One was to create a group that I would have to lead as long as I was here. And he wanted to speak directly with people in person, so he asked to do this. Thus, the advanced universal training stages were born, curated, and guided by them, not by us. That is, they create the program, they dictate it. All right, so it's truly an extraordinary thing. And, as they say, we are navigating by sight. We don't know anything. Things just come. The program arrives, and then it is set up and done. And for us, it's also a journey of discovery, especially when doing it for the first time. When we did the second level, for the first time, it was a discovery. It's only the first level that I thought of structuring myself. I presented the first level to Ariel, and he said to me, yes, Lovely. It seems like it was made by angels. I remember, he said this amusing phrase to me. And then, the second level was dictated by him, and he has already dictated the third level as well. So this will be, I repeat, by the end of the year. Therefore, the path they ask to undertake, this project, which is indeed a stage of advanced universal training, is universal because it is done in synergy with them, guided by them. And this too is really such an extraordinary experience that it still sometimes leaves us quite amazed, because it's very nice to think of being able to do things in synergy and sharing with other planes of existence. So, therefore, it's important for those who have already done the first one. We have conducted other first levels around. We did them in Padua, we did them in San Remo, we did them in Rome. Now I can't remember anymore. Anyway, those who have done the first level, try to come and do the second. Those who have done the second, come and review the lesson, because then the third, obviously, can only be done by those who have done the second. That is, those who have done the first, the second, and so on. On the other hand, when we go to school, we start from the first grade, don't we? We don't start from the third or the second, we start from the first grade. So there is a reason, because there is a gradual progression in the educational path, I repeat, all guided by them. So it is truly a very extraordinary opportunity, that of the Universal Advanced Training course. And so, I really look forward to seeing you in Turin for the second level, together with Riccardo, of course, because Ariel will indeed want to speak, and together with our Bruno Pepe, with whom we already did the second level in Turin last year, and with whom we also did their soul dowsing with Lux Live. And so, dear Bruno, well, he will be with us again, happily with us. It was a very beautiful experience, the one we had for the second level. Those who participated were indeed very enthusiastic and understood that we really made a leap, working on a much more advanced front than that of the first level. The third will be even more so, but I won't tell you anything because I'll let you discover the beauty of this program. So, dear friends, I send you a big hug. Thank you for your presence and for your closeness. I also thank you for your participation in the channel. Thank you, because you choose us so many times. And subscribe to the channel. Give us your likes. You know that, for us, subscribing is like a thank you vote, because we are simply doing a service job. We have no other interests. So subscribing costs nothing, and it's your way of thanking us for all this volunteer work that we do together with the staff. So really a big hug to everyone. As usual, we'll see each other in my lounges and on the channel's broadcasts. Don't miss our appointments. And activate the bell so you can receive information on all our live broadcasts. A big thank you once again, and see you soon.